Joining us now from Tehran is Seyed Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor of North American Studies and Dean of the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran. Professor, thanks for joining us. When we look at the very fast developing events in Iraq, which is your neighbor, what is Tehran's view of what's happening?
Well, the Iranians, of course, are deeply concerned. They do believe that the Iraqi government and the Iraqi army will be able to ultimately overcome the situation and drive the extremists back. But at the end of the day, Iranians believe that the United States and the Europeans are the ones who are really to blame for all these problems, because from the very beginning, they supported Saddam Hussein in Iraq, then they destroyed Iraq later on when they turned against Saddam Hussein. Then in Syria, they supported extremist groups, and now those extremist groups are spreading into Iraq, which is a weak country thanks to the United States. It doesn't have a strong army, and we have the chaos that we see today. So this is a crisis that has been brought about basically because of American intervention in this part of the world and an unholy alliance between the United States and Saudi Arabia and the development of extremist ideology in this part of the world.
Have the Iranians received any calls for help from the government of Nouri al-Maliki?
Well, the Iranian president has promised the Iraqi government and the Iraqi prime minister that he will support him in a telephone conversation, and he will support the Iraqi people. Iran has strong trade relations with Iraq, and therefore there's a lot of coming and going between the two countries. Obviously, the Iranians will give any sort of intelligence information or logistical support or political support that the Iraqi government wants, but there's been no talk of military involvement. There's no talk whatsoever of Iranian troops being involved in any way or form. The Iraqi government is confident that they will be able to ultimately drive these forces back. But of course, it is the Iraqi people who are paying a major price for the rise of extremism in this part of the world. And the only way really to end this is for the international community to force countries like Saudi Arabia that export this ideology. Boko Haram is linked to this ideology in Nigeria. It is an ideology that is in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now it is spreading across the globe. And there must be pressure on Saudi Arabia to put an end to this.
You say there are no Iranian forces in Iraq, but there are news reports which are pretty being widely circulated right now that there are parts of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran which have already been deployed in Iraq.
Well, the Iranian deputy foreign minister just 3-4 hours ago stated that these news reports coming out from the United States are untrue, and that at the moment there are no Iranian troops inside Iraqi territory. The main problem, of course, is that under American pressure, I must remind your viewers, that the Iraqi government allowed some of the Ba'athist troops and senior military officials from the regime of Saddam Hussein to return to the Iraqi army. And it was these people who either betrayed the army during this offensive or who deserted their positions. And to a large degree, the reason why parts of northern Iraq collapsed so quickly was because the senior military command was affiliated to the former Iraqi regime and was, as I said, only brought back because of American pressure.
President Barack Obama is now responding to what is going on in Iraq. He was asked what the United States can do, and he said nothing is off the table. But I think administration officials are telling journalists privately that there are not going to be boots on the ground. U.S. troops are not going to be back in Iraq, but there could be air support for the government of Nouri al-Maliki. What kind of an impact would that have on the region if U.S. forces do return?
Well, obviously, that's a matter for the Iraqi government to decide. And the Iranian government will not involve itself in the decision-making process that goes on in Baghdad. But I think the view here is that The Americans are a part of the problem. Bombing a few positions of the ISIL, the Daesh, or other extremists, either in Iraq and Syria, are not going to solve the problem. As long as the ideology is being funded by tens of billions of dollars coming from Arab oil-rich dictatorships, as long as their ideology is spreading across the region and across the world, we are going to continue to witness this sort of situation. Today, Iraq, tomorrow, somewhere else. Just like yesterday, it was Syria. And it still exists in Syria, but now it's evolving the situation. So bombing a few convoys is not going to change anything. The only thing that can bring about change is for the Europeans and the United States to stop aligning themselves with countries that advocate extremist ideologies.
Right, and as I pointed out, events have moved very quickly in Iraq. There are also now hundreds of thousands of people, Iraqis, who have been displaced by the fighting that is taking place. What are the chances here for major destabilization in Iraq that could impact Iran?
Well, that is, of course, a major concern. Many people have been internally displaced, and this has long-term consequences for the country if the Iraqi government fails to push back the ISIL. It would obviously be a burden on the Iranian economy, because, of course, the worse things get in Iraq, the worse, the less trade there is for Iran. But also, potentially, there could be refugees coming to Iran. We still remember that Iran hosted 2.5 million Iraqi refugees when Saddam Hussein attacked the north of the country. And that, of course, is an economic burden. But the most important thing really is what goes on in Iraq and how the ordinary Iraqis are suffering, because they are the ones who are being punished more than anyone else, just like the people of Syria have been being punished for 3.5 years because of a civil war that the Americans and the Europeans and the Turks and the Saudis and the Qataris instigated through funding militant and extremist organizations illegally and allowing them to cross international borders. The people of Syria their country has been devastated, and I think the international community has to wake up and prevent this from again repeating itself in Iraq.
There is a major debate which is emerging now in the United States between those who say the United States should have left a sizable force in Iraq, and of course those who say, like President Obama, that the war ended, we needed to take all the troops out. What is your view on that? If the United States had left troops there, indeed if they should return, would that aggravate the situation?
Definitely. No one likes to have American troops on their soil. People in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or in any other country would feel humiliated to have such a foreign presence in their country, and it only serves to increase anger among the local communities, and this itself could lead extremist organizations to gather more supporters. The American presence, the American invasion from the very beginning was illegitimate. The American support for Saddam Hussein in the 1980s was illegitimate. The Americans have to rethink their whole role in this part of the world. And as I said, the United States really has to look and see what the root of the problem is. The root of the problem is the extremism itself. Where is this ideology being funded from? We all know that it's coming from, for the most part, from Saudi Arabia and other Arab oil-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region. Unless this stops, then the problem is going to, again, reveal itself in other parts of the world. Boko Haram, as I said, in Nigeria, is a problem that has its roots in Saudi Arabia. In Afghanistan, the extremism of the Taliban has its roots again in Saudi Arabia, because that's where the ideology comes from, that's where the books come from, that's where these their so-called clerics are being educated, and that's where the TV stations are being receiving their funding from. So unless the Saudis are forced to change their sectarian, racial and religious hatred, the tone of religious, sectarian and racial hatred that comes from their textbooks and their media, unless this happens, unless there's change, then this is going to continue.
Professor Marandi, thanks for joining us.